There's a truth most men never want to hear. A woman can sense your weakness without you saying a single word. It's in your energy. It's in how you respond to her silence. It's in how quickly you fold the moment you feel tension. She doesn't have to test you intentionally. Life does it for her. And when you don't hold your frame, she knows. This isn't about being toxic. It's about being unshakable. So if you've ever wondered why respect slipped away, why the energy shifted, this is the part where we tell you the things no one else will. Here are 7 signs she sees weakness in you. And trust me, she doesn't need to say it aloud. She just feels it. When a man begins to over-explain himself constantly, it's rarely just about communication. It's almost always a reflection of deeper insecurity. Over-explaining is rooted in the subconscious belief that your truth alone isn't enough to be accepted, that your reasons need polishing, justification, and validation in order to be worthy. And women pick up on that energy immediately. Every time you offer long-winded reasons for why you didn't call, why you couldn't make it, or why you said something the way you did, you're not just explaining events, you're revealing your fear. You're trying to manage how she's going to perceive you, rather than standing grounded in the fact that your actions come from a place of self-trust. And when a man doesn't trust himself, no woman will trust him either. In the beginning, a woman may find it sweet. She may call it thoughtful, but over time it becomes clear that it's not depth, it's fear disguised as transparency. A man who's grounded doesn't defend his every move. He understands that his silence is just as powerful as his words. He doesn't talk to win her approval. He speaks to express, not to impress. But when you're constantly over-explaining, you're signaling that you fear rejection more than you value authenticity. And nothing kills attraction faster than that subtle scent of desperation. Over-explaining is also a form of emotional self-abandonment. It's when you betray your own peace to chase her comfort. You dilute your message so it won't disturb her. You stretch your sentences to soften the blow of your truth. You lace your words with justifications so she won't get upset, so she won't leave, so she won't think less of you. But in doing so, you begin to think less of yourself. You make your truth negotiable. You become more invested in managing her reaction than owning your reality. And women, whether they admit it or not, feel that shift. They feel when your voice shakes, not from anger, but from anxiety. They sense when you're trying to talk your way back into being seen, rather than standing firm in who you are. There's a quiet power in saying less, in allowing silence to carry what words cannot. A woman respects the man who doesn't need to fill every space with justification, who doesn't turn every simple conversation into an emotional courtroom, who doesn't treat her disappointment as a death sentence. Because what you show her in those moments is emotional strength. You show her that your decisions are not up for negotiation, that your time doesn't require a sales pitch, and that your presence is not up for debate. That's where respect is born, not from how much you explain, but from how little you feel the need to. It also becomes clear that a man who over-explains is constantly seeking safety outside of himself. He hopes her understanding will protect him. He hopes her validation will affirm him. He leans so hard on her emotional response that when it doesn't go the way he hopes, he collapses. This is why women often start to emotionally pull back, because no one wants to feel like they're the emotional lifeline to someone who won't stand on their own. Over time, it breeds exhaustion. It turns passion into pity. And the woman who once leaned into your energy starts to lean away from it, not because she's cold, but because she no longer feels anchored by you. When your words become too many, they begin to lose weight. She starts to hear noise instead of clarity, emotion instead of direction. You become readable, predictable, and easily swayed. And once a woman knows she can shake you with nothing more than a sigh or a pause, she begins to test you, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unconsciously. not because she wants to hurt you, but because she wants to feel the edges of your strength. She wants to know, will you hold your ground, or will you shrink into softness every time she's uncomfortable? Tolerating disrespect in the name of love is one of the most silent forms of self-betrayal a man can commit. It's not noble. It's not mature. It's not the sign of someone who is deeply in love. It's the mark of someone who is deeply disconnected from their self-worth. The moment you allow disrespect to become a regular presence in your relationship, no matter how subtle it appears, through dismissive comments, constant criticism, emotional manipulation, or passive aggression, you begin sending a message not only to her, but to yourself, that your peace, your dignity, and your boundaries are negotiable if the connection feels good enough to cling to. This behavior doesn't start loud. It starts in the small silences. The times you felt something wasn't right, but said nothing because you didn't want to rock the boat. The moments you noticed her tone crossing into condescending, but you excused it as her just having a bad day. The times you were blamed for her unhappiness, and you believed it because you thought it was your role to fix her feelings. You internalized that if you just stayed more patient, more loving, more understanding, she'd eventually come around and treat you better. But here's the truth. You taught her how to treat you. You showed her what she could get away with. And over time, she believed it too, because you trained her by allowing it. Men often confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice. They believe enduring emotional turmoil is a badge of strength. They convince themselves that absorbing mistreatment is part of loving someone deeply. But what you're really doing is shrinking. You're shrinking your voice, your standards, your inner compass, just to hold on to someone who keeps showing you that they have no problem watching you slowly lose yourself. And when a woman sees that her words can wound you and still be welcomed, she loses respect for you, not because she's cruel, but because you no longer offer her the challenge of your standards. She begins to see you as someone who will accept the bare minimum, and no woman wants to feel like she's with a man who has no backbone behind his heart. You think you're keeping the relationship alive by staying silent, but what you're really doing is teaching her that love can coexist with disrespect. And once she realizes that, the line between intimacy and manipulation becomes dangerously blurry. She'll test your tolerance, she'll push your emotional limits, not always maliciously, but out of curiosity, to see if there's any part of you that still belongs to yourself. If you don't stand up for yourself, she may begin to see you less as a partner and more as an emotional cushion, someone who will always be there no matter how rough her hands become. Disrespect doesn't need to be loud to be destructive. It can live in the way she ignores your opinions, in the sarcasm that cuts too deep, in the eye rolls that speak louder than her words. And every time you let it slide, you're not just tolerating her behavior, you're reinforcing it. You're telling her that your love comes without boundaries, that she can bring chaos to your life without consequence. And when love comes without the accountability of respect, it loses its power. It becomes a weapon, not a bond. The saddest part is that many men stay in this cycle because they think leaving means they failed. They think drawing a line means giving up. But choosing yourself is never failure. Walking away from disrespect isn't weakness, it's emotional maturity. It's choosing to be a man who values peace over performance, dignity over drama. It's recognizing that love without respect isn't love at all. It's dependency wrapped in emotion. And no matter how deeply you care for someone, if that love costs you your self-respect, it was never a healthy connection to begin with. Being afraid to walk away is one of the clearest signs of emotional weakness, and deep down, she knows it. When a man stays not out of conviction, but out of fear, fear of being alone, fear of losing her to someone else, fear of not finding better, he begins to hand over his power in silence. And the moment she senses that fear, the dynamic shifts. She's no longer with a man who chooses her from strength, but one who clings to her from insecurity. That shift doesn't just affect how she sees you, it affects how she treats you, responds to you, and ultimately respects you. Fear paralyzes your decision-making. It convinces you to rationalize toxic behaviors just to avoid the discomfort of confrontation or the pain of letting go. You start telling yourself, maybe it's not that bad. She'll change. All couples have problems. While every part of you feels drained, unheard, and dismissed. But the truth is, you're not staying because of hope. You're staying because you're terrified of what life might look like without her. And that fear forces you to compromise your peace, your values, and sometimes even your self-worth. When a man is afraid to walk away, he becomes emotionally dependent. He waits for validation, begs for attention, tolerates patterns he would have never accepted before. She senses this. She tests it. Whether consciously or not, she begins to treat you accordingly. Because if you've shown her that you'll stay no matter how inconsistent, disrespectful, or unavailable she becomes, why would she change? Why would she rise to meet your standards if she knows you'll lower them just to keep her around? Women respond to strength, not submission. They're drawn to the man who values himself enough to leave when he's not valued in return. A man who can walk away, not with rage, not with resentment, but with calm conviction. That kind of man is rare, and that kind of energy can't be faked. But the one who stays and suffers silently, the one who accepts breadcrumbs and labels it love, he becomes forgettable, predictable, and eventually disrespected. And yet many men still stay, hoping that more time, more effort, or more patience will fix what's already broken. They confuse emotional endurance with masculinity. But enduring mistreatment isn't strength, it's avoidance. It's a man choosing familiarity over growth, clinging to chaos because it feels safer than the unknown. But the longer you stay in what drains you, the harder it becomes to remember what fulfillment even looks like. Walking away is not about punishing her, it's about honoring yourself. It's the decision to no longer beg for the bare minimum. It's saying, I love you, but I love me more. And that doesn't come from ego. It comes from emotional clarity, from knowing that a connection built on fear is already broken. And if your presence isn't met with mutual effort, then your absence becomes the most powerful message you can send. When you're afraid to walk away, you're telling her without saying a word that she holds all the cards, that your emotions are hostage to her approval, her attention, her willingness to choose you. That's not love. That's emotional dependency dressed as loyalty. And no matter how much you care, staying in a space where you are undervalued is self-inflicted damage, because deep down, you know what you deserve. You know when you're being tolerated instead of treasured. But fear clouds your judgment and convinces you to accept less, just to avoid the pain of starting over. That fear becomes your prison, and she becomes the warden you've given the key to. Seeking constant reassurance may seem like a harmless need for comfort, but in a woman's eyes, it signals something deeper, an internal instability, an emotional insecurity that demands validation outside rather than cultivating it within. When a man frequently needs to hear, I still love you, I'm not going anywhere, or you're enough, it begins to drain the feminine energy rather than inspire it. At first, she may accommodate it. She may soothe, reassure, even nurture those insecurities. But as time goes on, what once felt like emotional openness starts to feel like emotional weight. And she starts to wonder, why does he need so much reassurance in the first place? What is he not grounded in within himself that makes my words his only source of peace? Masculinity thrives in groundedness, in certainty, in inner knowing. The man who knows his worth doesn't need external reminders to validate it. But when a man seeks constant reassurance, especially in subtle ways, frequent, "Are you okay with me? Did I upset you? Do you still feel the same about us?" it starts to communicate a lack of self-trust. And the truth is, if you don't trust your own presence, your own value, your own place in her life, then how can she? Women may be emotionally expressive, but they are energetically perceptive. They pick up on anxiety before words are even spoken. They sense when a man's energy is reaching outward for approval instead of standing tall within. When reassurance becomes a habit rather than an occasional exchange, it morphs into emotional dependency. You rely on her mood, her responses, her attention to stabilize you, and in doing so, you give her the power to regulate your emotional state. That's a burden, not a bond. Relationships are meant to be supportive, not places where one partner becomes a therapist for the other's unhealed wounds. The woman may stay, but her perception of your strength shifts. You're no longer the emotional anchor. You're the emotional question mark. And here's the hard truth. When a man needs constant reassurance, it doesn't make a woman feel more loved. It makes her feel less safe. Because if you're constantly unsure of your place, of her affection, of the relationship itself, you're broadcasting a silent message. I don't believe I'm enough, and I need you to keep proving I am. That creates pressure, not peace. That builds tension, not trust. And eventually it erodes the very connection you're trying to protect. Women are drawn to certainty, not arrogance, not coldness, but quiet confidence. They want to feel your emotional spine, your steadiness in the face of doubt. Because life is chaotic and love is unpredictable, but a man who can stand firm without always needing to be held up becomes a pillar, not a project. The more you require her to constantly reaffirm your worth, the more you unconsciously teach her to see you as someone who cannot stand alone, and that weakens attraction over time, not because she doesn't care, but because she doesn't want to mother the man she once admired. If you're always asking for emotional proof, you're silently announcing your disbelief. You're showing her that no matter what she gives, it's never enough to make you feel secure. That's not romantic, it's exhausting. And it turns what should be mutual connection into a one-sided emotional rescue. You stop being the man who leads with presence and become the man who pleads for comfort. And while she might not say it out loud, inside she begins to wonder how long she can carry the weight of your uncertainty. Because it's not her job to convince you that you're enough. It's yours. Apologizing for being a man is one of the most subtle yet powerful ways a man unconsciously erodes his own strength in the eyes of a woman. And no, it doesn't always come in the form of a literal apology. Sometimes it's in the way you lower your voice when you speak your mind, the way you second-guess your assertiveness, the way you avoid confrontation to avoid being labeled aggressive. Sometimes it's in the way you shrink your opinions to be more palatable, or how you hesitate to take the lead because you've been conditioned to believe that leadership is toxic when it comes from a man. All of it, every hesitation, every act of self-silencing, every moment you dilute your masculine essence to fit into an emotional mold that doesn't belong to you is a quiet apology, and she feels it. She may not call it out directly, but she feels when you're not fully standing in who you are. In today's climate, masculinity is under a microscope. It's misunderstood, misrepresented, and often villainized. Men are told to be softer, quieter, more agreeable, essentially more acceptable. And many take that as a signal that being unapologetically masculine is wrong. So they begin to overcorrect. They suppress their natural instincts to lead, to protect, to assert, and instead replace them with behaviors that seek approval rather than command respect. They start to ask instead of decide. They follow instead of guide. And what's worse, they apologize directly or indirectly for possessing the very traits that once defined their strength, not realizing that by trying to be harmless, they become forgettable. A woman may say she wants a sensitive man, a gentle man, a man who listens, and those things matter. But what she doesn't always articulate is that she also craves the polarity, a man who can listen but also lead, who can be tender but not timid, who can hold emotional space without surrendering his backbone. She needs to feel that she is with a man who doesn't flinch in the face of her emotional storms, who doesn't apologize for being grounded in his masculine truth. When you keep apologizing for who you are as a man, you unconsciously teach her to see your masculinity as something that needs to be managed rather than admired. And let's be clear, being masculine doesn't mean being domineering, insensitive, or emotionally disconnected. It means being solid. It means being rooted. It means being decisive when needed, protective when called, and assertive when it counts. Masculinity is not toxicity. Weakness masquerading as meekness is not virtue. And a man who's afraid to take up space in his own relationship is not being noble. He's being neutered. And the woman might not say it out loud, but a man who apologizes for his masculinity will never fully awaken the depth of feminine respect she is capable of giving. Because deep down, every woman wants to feel the power of a man who owns who he is, without shame, without shrinking, without seeking permission. When you apologize for your masculinity, you don't just soften your edges, you blur your presence. You become less felt, less heard, less trusted, not because you're unkind, but because you're unsure. And uncertainty in a man makes a woman feel like she's the one who has to lead, has to stabilize, has to be both soft and strong. And when she has to constantly step into that role, it doesn't feel empowering, it feels exhausting. She begins to feel like she's parenting the man instead of partnering with him. Not because she wants dominance, but because she desires a presence that stands tall without guilt. Masculinity is not something to be apologized for. It's something to be refined, respected, and rooted in. You weren't born to tiptoe around your own essence. You were born to embody it with purpose, with integrity, and with unapologetic clarity. The moment you stop apologizing for being a man, you stop asking for approval and start commanding respect, not through force, but through certainty, through a quiet strength that doesn't need validation because it already knows its worth. Being always available may sound like a virtue on the surface. It seems generous, devoted, even romantic. But in truth, it's one of the quickest ways to become invisible in a woman's eyes. When your presence is guaranteed, your absence loses value. When you're always accessible, your energy starts to feel ordinary, expected, and eventually taken for granted. Availability without intention isn't presence, it's passivity. And women can sense that. They can feel when your time isn't governed by purpose, but by a subtle desperation to be seen, wanted, or needed. And that energy isn't attractive, it's exhausting. It whispers, "I'll give you all of me, even when you're giving nothing in return." That doesn't build attraction, it builds imbalance. Men often confuse availability with commitment, thinking that being constantly present will prove their worth or secure emotional closeness. But relationships don't deepen through overexposure. They deepen through meaning. Intentionality is what gives your time value. It's what signals that your presence isn't on autopilot. It's a conscious decision. When you're intentional, every moment you offer a woman carries weight because it's deliberate, not default. You're not just there because you have nowhere else to be. You're there because you chose to be. That distinction, though subtle, is everything in the eyes of a woman who seeks depth over dependency. What many men don't realize is that constantly being available strips them of one of their greatest masculine currencies, mystery. Not mystery as in playing games or withholding affection, but mystery as in having a life that isn't orbiting hers. A purpose that commands your focus, a mission that consumes your mind. When you're always at her beck and call, it sends a message that you're waiting for her validation, her attention, her direction. And over time, that waiting begins to feel like weakness. Because no man who's on a mission is always available. No man who values himself gives unlimited access to someone who hasn't earned it. And no woman can truly respect a man who constantly sacrifices his time just to stay relevant in her life. Availability without boundaries is not love. It's a lack of self-respect disguised as affection. You don't win a woman's loyalty by proving you'll drop everything for her. You earn her respect by showing that your life doesn't revolve around her whims, that your attention has standards, and that your energy is something that must be met with reciprocity. When you're too available, you lose your gravitational pull. You become background noise instead of the signal. And attraction is built in the spaces between, not in the smothering closeness that comes from fearing distance. There's nothing noble about constantly showing up when she hasn't asked, hasn't reached out, or hasn't reciprocated. Your consistent presence shouldn't be her backup plan. It should be something she looks forward to, not something she assumes. And that only happens when your availability is selective, not from arrogance, but from self-worth. A man who values his time naturally invites others to do the same. He doesn't beg for connection, he inspires it. He doesn't overextend, he aligns. He doesn't flood her space. He fills his own and lets her come closer by choice, not out of obligation. Being intentional means having a direction, a rhythm, a standard for your energy. It means saying no to things that drain you, even if that thing is her emotional inconsistency. It means choosing moments of presence over patterns of performance. Because ultimately, women remember how a man made them feel. And feeling like you are a man with purpose, restraint, and self-governed value will always speak louder than being the guy who was simply always there. When a man consistently over-explains himself, tolerates disrespect in the name of love, fears walking away, seeks constant reassurance, apologizes for his masculinity, and makes himself endlessly available without intention, he unconsciously hands over his power piece by piece. Not because he's weak by nature, but because he has forgotten his center. A woman doesn't lose respect for a man all at once. It happens gradually through these silent concessions that seem small in isolation but compound over time. Masculinity isn't loud or forceful. It's steady, decisive, self-respecting, and rooted. A man who truly values himself doesn't need to prove it with words. His presence speaks for him. And when a man reclaims that presence, when he stops seeking to be chosen and begins choosing himself, everything shifts. Respect returns. Polarity reawakens. And most importantly, he no longer fears losing what was never aligned with his truth to begin with.